Welcome to the silent screams, where the quiet isn't peace. It's a warning. Every story you'll hear here is said to be true, whispered by those who lived to tell it, and by those who didn't. So turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and listen closely, because the things you're about to hear aren't just stories, they're the echoes of real nightmares. Pause, faint sound of a distant scream, then whisper, "This is the silent screams." The boat glided slowly through the still green waters of the Xochimilco canals. The air was heavy with the smell of moss and decay, and the distant sound of mariachi music faded as Emily's guide rowed them deeper into silence. She had come all the way from Los Angeles to film a short travel documentary, a piece about strange legends around the world. Isla de las Muñecas, the island of the dolls, was supposed to be the highlight, a creepy, atmospheric location, a good story. Nothing more, but as the boat drifted closer, the sunlight dimmed behind a curtain of thick trees. The air grew colder. Even the birds stopped singing. The guide, an old man with weary eyes, crossed himself quietly and muttered, "Don't stay too long, señorita. The dolls remember the dead." Emily smiled nervously, pretending she didn't understand. Yet something inside her tightened. Through the mist ahead, she saw it, a cluster of trees, heavy with hundreds of dolls. Their heads tilted at strange angles, their glass eyes staring in every direction. Some hung by the neck, others nailed to trunks, their limbs rotting, their faces melted by years of rain and sun. The boat bumped gently against the dock, and Emily froze, camera in hand. Dozens of eyes stared back at her. The wind shifted, making the dolls sway on their strings. The sound they made was soft but unmistakable, a chorus of tiny squeaks, like whispers from another world. She raised her camera and began recording, forcing herself to laugh under her breath. "It's just wind," she whispered. The guide refused to step onto the island. "They don't like visitors," he said, his voice trembling slightly. Emily turned to him, confused. "Who doesn't?" He looked past her, toward the hanging dolls, the ones that never left. The old guide's voice trembled as he pushed the boat away from the dock, letting Emily step onto the damp soil of the island. "Don Julian lived here alone," he began, his words thick with reverence and fear. "He wasn't always a madman. He was just chosen." Emily pointed her camera toward him as he spoke, capturing his wrinkled face framed by a forest of dolls swaying in the breeze. Their eyes reflected the faint glow of the sun, and each time the wind moved, it sounded as if the island was breathing. "Many years ago," the guide continued, "a little girl drowned in this canal. Don Julian found her body floating near the reeds. He tried to save her, but it was too late. The current had already taken her soul. A few days later, he found a doll in the same place. He believed it belonged to her spirit, a sign, a message. So he hung it here." Emily asked. The guide nodded, "To calm her ghost." But after that, he started finding more dolls. Some floated to the shore. Some, he said, appeared overnight. He began to collect them, one by one, hanging them all around. He said the dolls spoke to him. He said they protected him. Emily turned her camera toward the trees. Hundreds of faces stared back at her, cracked, burned, and eyeless. Some had spiders nesting in their hollow skulls. Others were missing limbs, their plastic bodies chewed by time. "Did anyone ever see the girl again?" Emily asked. But the guide looked down at the water. "No," he whispered. But years later, Don Julian's body was found in the same spot where the girl had drowned. Emily felt her heart skip. The air seemed to thicken. "And now?" she asked. He smiled sadly. "Now, he's not the only one who listens to them." A single doll fell from its string, landing at Emily's feet with a soft thud. Its porcelain face cracked down the middle, and from somewhere deep in the trees came the faint sound of a child giggling. By sunset, the canals had turned black. The last boat had vanished beyond the mist, leaving Emily alone with the hum of insects and the low ripple of water. The air smelled of rot and wet earth, and the dolls hanging from the trees swayed as if whispering to each other. She set up her tent near the center of the island, her camera facing the forest, hoping to capture some eerie nighttime footage for her documentary. At first, everything seemed calm. The chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves, the soft creaking of ropes as the dolls turned lazily in the wind. But the longer she listened, the more unnatural it felt, like there was a rhythm beneath the noise, a pulse that didn't belong to nature. Her flashlight flickered once, then stabilized. She adjusted her camera, zooming into a cluster of dolls near a broken fence. Their faces looked different in the dark, twisted, almost human. Their shadows stretched along the ground, like long black fingers reaching toward her tent. She turned off the flashlight to conserve battery, letting the pale moonlight fill the clearing. That was when she heard it, a whisper, soft, like someone breathing too close to her ear. She froze. It wasn't the wind, it was a word. Her name, Emily. Her heart pounded so loud she could hear it echo inside her skull. She spun around, shining the light toward the trees. No one, only hundreds of dolls, their glass eyes catching the light and returning it with cold precision. She tried to laugh it off, speaking into her recorder. "It's probably the wind through the trees," she said, her voice trembling. "Nothing paranormal here." Then she heard it again, louder, closer. "Emily." Her camera beeped, motion detected. She looked at the screen. In the distance, between the trees, one of the dolls had turned its head. The night deepened until even the moonlight seemed afraid to touch the island. Emily sat by the shore with her camera tripod planted in the mud, recording the still, dark water. The silence was so complete it pressed against her ears. No frogs, no wind, not even the creak of the dolls anymore. As if the whole island had paused, waiting for something. She adjusted the focus ring, zooming in on the reflection of the hanging dolls swaying above the canal. The water shimmered faintly, distorting their faces into strange, elongated masks. Then, the screen flickered a quick blur of motion, something rippling beneath the surface. Emily frowned. "Fish," she whispered, though the word didn't convince even herself. She crouched closer, her breath clouding over the lens. The water smelled sour, metallic, almost like blood. Then it came, a faint sound, rising through the surface. At first, it was like bubbles bursting underwater. Then, slowly, it became clearer, a voice. High, soft, unmistakably human. "Help me." Emily froze, every muscle locking in place. The voice was small, trembling, like that of a child. She scanned the canal, the beam of her flashlight trembling over the dark current. "Hello," she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is someone there?" No answer, only the sound of water lapping against the shore. She leaned closer, holding her breath. Then the voice came again, louder, sharper. "Emily." Her blood ran cold. She stumbled backward, nearly dropping her camera. The lens kept recording, capturing the rippling water, and for a split second, a pale hand broke through the surface before vanishing again. Emily gasped, heart hammering. She turned off her flashlight and backed away slowly, clutching her camera to her chest. The water stilled once more. Then, from behind her, in the shadows of the trees, came the faintest sound, the squeak of a doll turning its head. She didn't dare look. Emily couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she swore she could feel something watching her from the trees. The dolls hung motionless now, yet their glass eyes caught the faint glow of her dying lantern, glimmering like tiny mirrors in the dark. It felt as if hundreds of faces were waiting for her to move, to blink, so they could turn when she wasn't looking. She told herself it was exhaustion. She had been filming all day, walking through mud and weeds, inhaling the heavy stench of decay that never left the air. She turned off her camera to save battery. But the silence that followed was worse. Somewhere behind her, a faint clicking sound broke the stillness, like the sound of porcelain tapping against wood. She turned, flashlight trembling in her grip. Nothing, just dolls, swaying gently, their limbs twitching with the movement of the air. But the air wasn't moving. Emily raised her camera again and switched to night vision. Through the green filter, the island looked even more unnatural. Trees bending like skeletal ribs, dolls hanging like skinless faces. She zoomed in on one of them. Its head was tilted to the side, its mouth open just enough to show tiny white teeth. She moved the camera slightly. The head moved with it. Her breath hitched. She blinked, heart pounding. She zoomed closer, and for a fraction of a second, she saw it. The doll's eye twitched, then another, and another. Across the entire clearing, dozens of dolls were turning their heads toward her, one after another, their glass eyes flashing in the dim light like reflections of something far behind them. Emily stumbled back, whispering to herself, "No, this isn't real." Her camera beeped once, battery low. She turned to grab her backup light, but her hand froze mid-motion. A single doll, the headless one she'd seen earlier, was now sitting upright at the entrance of her tent. And from inside its hollow neck came the faint sound of breathing. The next morning brought no warmth, A heavy grey mist covered the island, and the air tasted of metal and mildew. Emily hadn't slept at all. Every sound from the night echoed in her mind, the whispers, the creaks, the breathing. Her camera batteries were dead, her phone showed no signal, and the guide's boat was nowhere in sight. That's when she saw it, a small wooden structure, half hidden by the overgrown trees. It leaned to one side, as if the earth itself had grown tired of holding it up. The door hung crooked, and dozens of dolls were nailed to the walls, their eyes gouged out, their mouths filled with dirt. A handmade sign above the doorway read, in faded paint, Casa Jidong Julia. Emily hesitated but stepped closer, pushing the door open with a groan. The smell hit her instantly, damp wood, rot, and something sweetly rancid, like old flowers left to decay. The inside was small and dark, the air so thick she could barely breathe. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars of murky liquid, feathers, and tiny bones. Dolls were everywhere, hanging from the ceiling, stuffed into corners, their faces covered with cobwebs. In the middle of the shack stood a wooden table. Upon it lay an old, water-damaged journal, the cover warped and blackened by mold. Emily brushed off the dust and opened it carefully. Most of the ink had bled away, but a few sentences were still readable, written in shaky Spanish. She cries for me every night. I hear her in the water. She says she is lonely. Another page. The dolls keep her calm, but she grows angry when I try to leave. The final entry was written in smudged ink, the words jagged and frantic. She wants another. She needs a keeper. Emily's throat went dry. She turned slowly toward the window. Outside, the mist had thickened, and through it, she saw movement, small shapes swaying, like shadows dancing among the trees. And then, from the back of the shack, she heard a voice, a little girl's whisper, soft and broken. Don't leave me, Julian. Night fell faster than Emily expected, swallowing the island in layers of fog and silence. She sat inside her tent with her recorder running, whispering field notes to herself, her voice steady only on the surface. Second night, the air feels different, heavy, like it's aware of me. The wind outside had died completely. The trees no longer moved. Even the water seemed frozen, the canal still as glass. She replayed her footage from the day, scanning the frames from Don Julian's shack. In one of them, barely visible in the corner, she saw it, a figure standing behind her reflection in the window. Small, barefoot, a girl. Her heart began to race. She rewound the clip. The figure was gone. Then came the sound, a faint cry, drifting across the canal. It was soft at first, the kind of sound the mind invents out of exhaustion, but it grew louder, a wail that twisted into something almost human. Emily froze, listening. It was the voice of a child. Help me. She grabbed her flashlight and stepped outside, her camera still recording. The mist coiled around her ankles like living smoke. Every step she took echoed unnaturally loud in the still air. She followed the sound to the water's edge. A doll floated there face down, its limbs splayed like a corpse. The current rocked it gently, back and forth. Emily crouched, flashlight trembling in her hand. Then, slowly, the doll began to turn over. Its eyes opened. The face was bloated. Its lips cracked, but when they parted, a faint voice escaped. Emily. The flashlight slipped from her hand, plunging the world into darkness. She screamed and stumbled back, but the cry didn't stop. It grew louder, echoing through the trees, through the dolls, through the air itself. Dozens of whispers joined in, a chorus of tiny voices repeating her name in unison. The dolls hanging above began to sway wildly, their heads spinning, their glass eyes flashing in the dark. Emily fell to her knees, covering her ears, but the sound wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was inside her head. Then everything went silent, from across the water. Through the fog, she saw her, a small girl in a white dress, dripping wet, standing on the surface of the canal, smiling. When the crying stopped, the island fell into a silence so deep it hurt. Emily's flashlight lay broken beside her, its weak beam flickering over the canal. The little girl in white was gone, but the ripples in the water still spread outward, slow and endless. Emily tried to move, but her body felt heavy, her lungs tight, as if the air had turned to liquid. She stumbled back toward her tent, shaking, whispering to herself that it wasn't real. It couldn't be. But as she approached, she noticed something wrong. The tent's flap was open. She hadn't left it that way. Inside, her camera was recording again on its own. The red light blinked steadily. On the screen, She saw herself sitting cross-legged in the center of the clearing, unmoving, staring blankly ahead. She turned around in confusion, her breath catching. The space was empty, but when she looked back at the screen, the figure, her double, was still there, smiling faintly. A voice echoed behind her, soft, feminine. "Stay with me." Emily spun around. The air rippled, and for an instant she saw her, the same little girl, standing just a few feet away, water dripping from her hair, her eyes dark and hollow. Emily took a step back, tripping over a fallen doll. It cracked under her shoe, and the girl's expression changed, sadness twisting into fury. The dolls around them began to move, their heads jerking violently as if reacting to her fear. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, one by one, until hundreds of tiny lights surrounded her like stars in hell. "Don't go," the girl whispered again, stepping closer. Emily screamed, backing into the shack, but the door slammed shut behind her. The dolls hanging inside swayed in unison, and their mouths cracked. Painted, lifeless began to open and close, whispering the same word again and again. "Stay, stay, stay." She dropped to her knees, clutching her head, her camera clattering to the floor. The whispers grew louder, the room spinning, her vision blurring until all she saw were faces. Faces of dolls, faces of children, faces of the dead. Her last conscious thought was a voice, not the girl's, not her own, whispering inside her skull, "You're mine now." Then the screen went black. When the sun finally rose, the island was silent again, a different kind of silence, heavy and unnatural. The mist still clung to the trees like smoke, and the dolls hung motionless, as if frozen mid-breath. Around mid-morning, the local boatmen returned, their laughter fading as they neared the shore. "Señorita Emily," one of them called out. No answer. The air felt wrong, too still. They tied the boat to the dock and stepped onto the island, their boots sinking into the damp earth. Her tent was still standing, its entrance open. Inside, her camera lay on the ground, still recording. The red light blinked weakly. The last few minutes of footage showed nothing but static, until, faintly, an image began to form. Emily was sitting on the ground near the old shack, her back turned to the camera. She wasn't moving. The wind rustled the leaves around her, but she remained perfectly still. For a moment, it looked almost peaceful, like she was meditating. Then her head tilted slightly, just enough to show her face. Her eyes were open, unblinking. The men froze. One of them whispered a prayer. Another tried to speak, but his voice cracked. They approached slowly, their steps crunching over old doll parts scattered in the dirt. But when they reached the spot where she'd been sitting, there was nothing, just her camera and a single doll hanging from a low branch above it. A doll that hadn't been there before. Its hair was blonde, its skin pale and new, unlike the others. Its eyes were painted a soft blue, the same color as Emily's, and around its neck was a strap made from torn black fabric, the same kind used for camera harnesses. The boatman backed away slowly. "Vamos," one of them whispered, voice trembling. "She's one of them now." As they rowed away, the camera still recording faint static, one of the dolls near the dock turned its head toward the departing boat. And from somewhere deep in the forest, a familiar voice, small, delicate, and terribly human, whispered through the wind, "Don't forget me." Today, Isla de las Muñecas still sits quietly in the canals of Xochimilco, just south of Mexico City. Tourists visit it daily, drifting through the green waters on brightly painted boats. They laugh, they take photos, they point at the hundreds of dolls hanging from the trees. Some even take selfies, pretending to be scared. But when the sun begins to set, the laughter fades, and even the guides avoid staying past dusk. They say the island changes when night falls. The air thickens, the birds vanish, and the dolls, the same ones that hang lifeless during the day, seem to shift their gaze. Visitors have reported whispers in languages they don't understand. Some hear crying, others swear they hear a girl's voice calling from the water, begging for help. Locals believe that Don Julian's spirit never left. They say he still walks the paths between the trees, checking each doll, caring for them like children. But lately, people have started to talk about something else, a new presence. They say a woman now walks beside him, blonde hair, pale skin, carrying a camera. Boatmen whisper that sometimes, when the moonlight hits the water just right, you can see her reflection, a young woman kneeling beside the canal, smiling faintly as the dolls sway around her. And if you listen closely, you can hear her voice beneath the wind, not in Spanish, but in English. "Stay with me. The island is still open to visitors, but those who go there at night often return changed, quiet, pale, their eyes distant. Some stop speaking altogether. A few never return. The locals don't like to talk about it. They just shake their heads and say the same words Don Julian once wrote in his journal. She needed a new keeper. So when you visit the island of the dolls, remember, you're not just a tourist. You're an offering. And if one of the dolls turns its head while you're watching, don't look away, because the island is still watching you too.